Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's Open News meeting, the penultimate Tortoise Open News meeting of the year, and we hope one that will generate lots of ideas for our journalism in 2021. In fact, just before this, we've been discussing Brexit, and it really is the subject of the day, and that's what the main subject I think we'll try and get into today, though in I hope a very specific way. You'll know what the purpose of these meetings is. It's to, as it were, crowdsource your ideas and listen to members of Tortoise staff as well on what's going on, but more importantly, what lines of inquiry we should be pursuing and investigating for future files, for future pieces on the site. So with that preamble, do join in conversation. The great and mighty Liz Mosley is running the chat today, so you'll have a very high quality of chat there. And I'm very keen, as ever, that as many of you as possible contribute to what I think is going to be a very interesting discussion, because it is a very energetic and intense day in news, not least because the Prime Minister has fled or rushed to Brussels, depending on which way you see it, to conduct talks with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to try and get his Brexit trade deal over the line. And he has only really a couple of days in practice since the Council of Ministers is meeting on Thursday and Friday. The deadline for the deal is December the 31st, but in order to get all the ratifications and necessary agreements done in practice, I think it's this week or not at all. And as ever with Boris Johnson, there is a kind of have his cake and eat it about even what he says about what he's doing, that he says it's very, very difficult. But on the other hand, he remains open-minded and wants there to be a deal, which I think reflects tensions within him as much as tensions within the country and indeed between Britain and Brussels. But to a certain extent, what I want to do is first get a kind of situation report on where we are, and as much as one can read the tea leaves, but then much more significantly, to my mind, to try and push forward from the Westminster Brussels soap opera of the moment to what this really means, because in 2021, deal or no deal, quite a lot of what we're doing as a news organization will not only be following the vaccine and the future of the pandemic, but also the consequences of Brexit red in tooth and claw, because this is a choice between hard Brexit or harder Brexit. And either way, it's going to have considerable consequences for the way we live, for our economy. We'll be in a recession anyway, but the trade consequences will be huge, as will the consequences for collaboration in healthcare, security, science, and innumerable other areas, not to mention travel. So what I want to try and do is as it were, fill our journalistic knapsack with ideas for what we should be chasing as we move from December into January, and Brexit really does become a reality, and to try and look at the things that will be radically different, the same, or even, as Brexiteers see it, better under the new jurisdiction. So without any more ado, I wonder if I might go to Giles Whittell, if he's my fellow editor and partner, Giles Whittell, if he's in the house. Giles, are you there? Giles, hi. Can you unmute? Great. I just wanted to kind of give you the hospital pass of asking, you've been following this in tremendous and vivid detail in SenseMaker, and I wondered if you can give us a sense of what the state of play is as you see it. I mean, clearly no one, including the principals, has a definitive answer to that question, and I'm not going to ask you if you think there'll be a deal or not, because I don't think anyone knows. But what you think the weight of probability is, and perhaps what the sticking points remain and where we are.
Sure. Yeah, even though you didn't ask, I'm going to tell you what I think anyway.
Please.
Also, you gave me one of those Zoom call panic moments just now when you said Boris has rushed to Brussels. And I thought, oh my God, has he rushed this morning since I last saw him in the hospital? And so I've checked. And as far as I know, he hasn't gone yet. He's most likely to go tomorrow.
I should have said is rushing to Brussels.
Yeah. No, but I take tenses very seriously. We're grammarians above all on tense.
Mine was incorrect. You're quite right. Grammatic preamble.
The phrase of the morning is very tricky. That is the phrase used by Johnson at the hospital where he was witnessing the rather moving first vaccinations this morning. It was the phrase by an unnamed senior Downing Street official. Also this morning, very tricky to describe what their view of the chances of a deal. I've tried to, as I've said to you before, Matt, I find it quite difficult to organize my thoughts on Brexit, but so I've put them in two lists. Reasons to think that there might be a deal. As conservatives in particular like to say, it's always like this. It goes down to the wire when you're negotiating with the EU. Both sides need a deal. That's true. Both need to be seen to have driven a hard bargain. We know that sort of up close and personal from this side, but of course that's become increasingly clearly the case with Macron and the French government this week and last. Of the three outstanding issues, fisheries, level playing field issues, and dispute resolution mechanism, or how you police the level playing field, fish, although emotive, is fungible. As both sides have said, it's a numbers game. So there's prospect for a deal. It may even have been reached behind the scenes already there. Yesterday, HMG, Johnson's government, made it clear to Brussels that it was ready to remove the offending law-breaking clauses from the internal market bill, which were notionally reinserted into that bill in the Commons, if there is a deal. And those are the clauses that Barnier and the other EU negotiators have found particularly provocative. But word was late last night that the European Commission, was happy with that position on those particular clauses. And as Chris Cook said in today's SenseMaker, there's an optics point here as well. Johnson would not want to go to Brussels, ideally, and fail and come back without a deal. So those are some reasons to suspect that perhaps a deal is in the offing. Against that, as Sir Ivan Rogers said in his chat with James Harding in our slow newscast not 10 days ago, this is a fundamentally different effort being made than in most free trade negotiations. In most, you have two sides that are apart coming together. In this one, you have two sides that are together and apparently want to move apart, or significant constituencies. And that is why the European side is so determined to have the level playing field provisions, but for precisely the same reasons. They are anathema to a large chunk of Boris Johnson's party, even though other people on our side of the channel regard it as a perfectly fair price to pay for access to the single market. But to that same constituency, which seems to loom very large in Johnson's mind, as it did in his predecessors, call them the headbangers, call them the ERG, call them the hardliners, call them simply the Brexiteers. The ratchet clauses that are spoken of, these are the clauses that would require the UK not to dilute standards on environmental standards and labour market rules and that kind of thing, and basically to stay in tandem with European ones. Those are anathema too, and being told to set up a regulator in advance. Also, It's just plain bossy to the more ardent Brexiteers who are so have to be dominant in Johnson's thinking, and because they go to the heart of what Brexit is for them, namely sovereignty and independence, which they regard as all or nothing. And another point to make by way of background is that the Andrew Bridgen and other backbenchers, about whom you'll know more, and you'll know more about their exact numbers as well, have made it clear that if they sniff so much as a whiff of surrender on Johnson's part, there will be a leadership challenge. Never mind the Fixed Terms Parliament Act, never mind an 80-seat majority, there'll be a leadership challenge. And that is why, in my view, Johnson has been so keen, ever since he came into his new job a year ago, to always seem to be the most ardent Brexiteer in the room. You were saying you wouldn't ask me for my view. Very briefly, I don't believe he is the most ardent Brexiteer in the room. I do believe he'll come back with something, if not peace in our time, then une pièce de boucher in his shopping bag. But this whole thing, this whole enterprise is irrational. I think I'll stick my neck out and say it's irrational. And so I could very well be wrong. I think another phrase that Johnson used this morning was sweet reason. I mean, the irony of invoking reason at this stage in an entirely irrational, self-harming enterprise is hilarious, or it would be if it wasn't, if the stakes weren't so high. And just to the one final point to sort of drive home the bonkersness of it all. The other thing that Johnson said this morning was, oh, by the way, just before you go, let me just remind all you business owners out there, get ready. And of course, for business owners who do business with the continent, they're very anxious to get ready and have been for the last 4 years, but they still don't know what for.
And Giles, it's interesting because it seems to me that the implication of what you say is that even if there is a deal, it will be founded upon the phrase that became famous during the Good Friday Agreement negotiations in Northern Ireland, which was constructive ambiguity, and that any form of agreement will rely upon kicking a lot of extremely important questions into the long grass. And therefore, to go back to your crucial concluding point about business and certainty, the only possible deal is one that doesn't offer that.
Is one that doesn't offer certainty.
Yes, I mean, in other words, the only way that Boris can return from Brussels with some form of, thin or skinny deal, or whatever you want to call it, will be that it has managed to postpone, fudge, or otherwise mitigate certain actually very, very important differences between London and Brussels, which in turn makes life ultimately quite difficult for businesses that are seeking precisely the opposite. They are the thing they have been craving all along since 2016 was the referendum, was a greater measure of certainty than I think they're likely to get. Yes.
If I understand it right, the most that can be hoped for now is about the least that anyone hoped for 4 years ago, even on the Brexit side, namely on January the 1st, there is not the instant imposition of tariffs and on goods and services going both ways. And that in that very basic respect, frictionless trade would continue. But as you say, pending resolution of all the key issues. I mean, I think if you just take a step back and look at this from low Earth orbit, you could say that the big question is this moment the moment at which divergence begins? as a large constituency would like, even if only for the sake of divergence, to sort of declare independence or make something of Brexit? Or is it in fact the moment at which, as a country battered and a bit bruised, we return to pragmatism, and there's a new consensus that we've made our point. Brexit is a thing. It's happened. Legally, we're no longer members of the Union, but this is actually as far apart as we want to go. And now, in a new sort of talks that will begin after January the 1st, we'll patch together a new sort of partnership that is messy, piecemeal, probably sectoral, but perhaps more appropriate. I mean, I hadn't really. That's quite an optimistic view of what's happening right now, and I hadn't even considered it until hearing it from the arch Remainer Ian Dunt the other day as a possibility, as the sort of as something one could hope for. But I don't know the answer.
Thank you very much, Giles. I wondered if I might turn to Chris Cook, my fellow editor and partner at Tortoise. Chris, are you there? Chris, hi. I mean, you not only wrote The Sense Maker, you actually wrote the book on Brexit. So, we turn to you for wisdom on this. And I'm keen to kind of mine your knowledge for, as it were, some detailed prophecies and leads on what we might expect, deal or no deal, early in the year, and what we should be chasing journalistically. Because as I say, as the gravitational pull of high politics and all this is huge, but this is about to become extremely real and extremely granular. And I wondered what you thought, in spite of the phased approach that Giles referred to, what the first impacts and shockwaves of this will be early in 2021.
So it's likely in all scenarios we're going to have a problem in Kent, whatever happens. So even if there is a maximal deal, the most we could hope for, there's still going to be paperwork checks, basically, and product regulatory checks that need to start taking place on goods crossing the border. There are things like animal exports. We're going to have to start. It's quite likely we're going to end up with situations where we're going to have to start, proving that our animals are properly kept, which was something that none of us expected 4 years ago, as they cross the border. And it's worth remembering that will go in both directions. So the garden centres in Great Britain are currently starting to stop selling to Northern Ireland, because the paperwork burden of selling into Northern Ireland for phytosanitary products is very high. A lot of that sort of low-level disruption, even in the event of the deal, is actually pretty close to the disruption we're getting in any event, because we're going for such a sort of minimalist relationship with the EU. There's stuff like data protection is going to be an issue. So, I mean, even for a company like us, we're going to have to start thinking about what the legal basis on which we are entitled to hold the names and addresses of our members in the European Union is, because it will be different to what it was before.
Is this, sorry, Chris, is that separate related to GDPR?
So we will no longer be covered by the EU's data umbrella.
Yeah.
So we'll have to show equivalence to GDPR, and obviously in a sort of technical sense, we are behaving equivalent to it, because we are we're doing it, but we rely on them, and it's fundamentally it's kind of half a political judgment as to whether someone gets data equivalency. There will also be spin-offs of that. So there'll be questions about, for example, security and access to security. If you don't get access on data equivalency, you definitely can't get access to the EU's policing databases. So security might be quite a flashpoint. These are things that can happen in either scenario, but much more likely with no deal, because the political will to be nice neighbours will be thinner. There are bits of finance that are relying on equivalence, and again, how will they interpret their ability to rule us equivalent? That's all stuff that's got to sort of come through in the next few months. And it's also stuff which is we were kind of on notice about, right? We know that they can pull the rug on us at pretty short notice. They've extended the financial services stuff a little, but it's still pretty much at their whim. So one of the problems we're going to face in the next phase, because there will always, one of the things we have to accept is that just as there are internal negotiations continuously in the EU between its 27/28 members, there will be permanent negotiation between us and the EU forever and ever and ever about these things, trying to speed stuff up. We'll suddenly realize actually this doesn't really work for this sector or this sector, and we'll try and smooth things down. And in that scenario, the fact that the equivalence regime is kind of one way is stuff that we'll have to be very wary about. I'm quite nervous about. It's a relationship.
So let's sort of transfer policy into lived experience. I mean, in terms of real experience, what are the first things that might conceivably persuade a Brexiteer household that they made a mistake? And conversely, if the Brexiteers are right, what are the first things that might persuade a Remainer household that they went wrong?
So I think the second one is kind of easier, right? So it's the central intellectual core of Brexit is the idea that we could do things better if we do them ourselves. And so you need a success in any domain, I think will be that people feel will be a big part of that. So what I have in mind in particular is if there is a sector that does well in the UK on account of our regulatory structure that previously didn't do well in the UK, and that might be a business a business none of us can think of now. No one is making. Maybe we will be the first people to. We've tried really hard on batteries with cars. Maybe we will do better with that. Maybe it'll be something like AI and self-driving cars. Maybe there's some. Yeah, I mean, Louise Jarvis says getting vaccines out first. That is, that's not a sustainable business model. But the thing is, so Giles is saying batteries are really hard. It's not about regulation, it's chemistry, but it's about getting companies in to, putting the tax incentives in place or putting the subsidy in place, bluntly, to get people to come here, putting regulatory structure in place that people can do stuff here they can't do elsewhere. That's kind of the test of the premise. The fundamental problem with if you like the promise of Brexit is that a lot of the whole thing about pinning your hopes on the cavalry that may or may not be behind the hill is you can't tell us whether the cavalry are behind the hill, and we don't know what they look like, and we don't know what they're going to sound like, and we don't know if it's going to be worth it or not. So that's the sort of big thing. It's a punt at best, but that's what a success will look like. On the other side of the fence, I think it will be so the NHS is one of the big things, right? So if the staffing difficulties that arise from Brexit become very acute, I think the £350 million a week stuff is too complicated. It's too third order for people to sort of really be able to work out what exactly £350 million are supposed to be. But staffing problems will be a really clear, pointy thing that's related to Brexit. And just the economic dislocation. There'll be lots of weird businesses that suddenly discover they're no longer really coping. And if something like Nissan decides, as has been reported in the German press, that actually it's not worth continuing in the UK, the car makers, I should point out, by the way, are absolutely ruthless game players, and that you should take absolutely nothing they brief or let known to anyone at any point at face value. So, I mean, Nissan has basically continuously been on the verge of quitting the UK for the last 4 years, apparently. All the meanwhile wringing huge scads of cash out of the government to keep it going. So they've got a load of subsidies for a business park that happens to be next to their plant, which is unrelated to Nissan. And then we've got a load of subsidies for battery research, which is all about Nissan as well. So don't take the car makers at face value. But actually, if one of the very large manufacturers, people doing proper jobs, start disappearing, that will be quite a blow.
So the KPI, given the specific economic circumstances of 2021, if I read you right, Chris, it will be jobs.
Yeah, so it is quite likely that our year outside the EU, our first year outside the transition period, will be the year of fastest growth in British history, right? So we're going to have the pandemic recession, bounce back will be bleeding into the beginning of next year. And it's quite possible we can have double-digit growth, which I have to confess I was not expecting to be off, first year outside the EU, but that is totally possible, totally doable. And it'll be hard to disentangle those effects. But there are things that should be structurally profitable companies for in the context of a boom, like car makers. If they start pulling in their horns, that'll be a really clear sign that kind of the plan is not working.
Thank you. Wanted to pick up on that point about the NHS and social issues generally with Liz Mosley, who I know has some thoughts on that. Liz, are you able to detach yourself briefly from the chat? And
I am. Yes, I don't know. Giles and Chris are very learned on this, and I'm very much a punter. I don't know, a citizen, a Remainer, actually. But there's a couple of things that I've, worried about. I mean, one thing I can say in a sentence, which is, I just worry that people won't be able to afford to buy food, much as that seems like a ludicrous thing to say. But there are lots and lots of people who this year, we've all given stuff to the food banks, haven't we? And if a tin of tomatoes really is going to be £2, that's kind of a concern. And somebody in the chat just made a mention of getting food in and out of Northern Ireland and things. So that's one thing that I have nothing useful to say about, other than it seems to me to be a concern. The other thing is a more precise pressure that I've been worried about since the Brexit thing happened initially, but has been compounded this year. I think if you sort of journalistically, if we try and home in on the sort of areas of overlap in the Venn diagram of what are the parts of the society and the economy that are particularly under pressure because of the pandemic, and then apply the additional Brexit pressures, sort of where are the real pinch points? And I think one of those is nursing. And I think that because there was sort of already a sort of latently a story in the sort of variation in different types of training and skills of people who work in nursing, various parts of the world, the requirement of the NHS to obviously need people from all over the world because we haven't got enough nurses here that have been trained in this country and all the rest of it. And that creates very real challenges on a day-to-day basis for if you are a matron and you're trying to staff up and run a department. You have people that you need to use that you don't know very well. You quite often need agency work and stuff like that. And these people have very, very different levels of capability, and it's incredibly difficult to know, because often they're strangers and you don't work with them very often, what they can and can't do. And it creates enormous pressure on just running procedure, which is what your job really is as a matron. And I think that the gap between the availability of nurses and the requirement of nurses was already there as a problem. Then Brexit happened and it looked like it was going to become a bigger problem. And then now you had so many people leave the profession, either through post-traumatic stress or because they're just knackered or because they think, I just don't want to do this anymore after this year. I really genuinely worry about who are going to be those people that are going to do those jobs. And that's the thing that has been lurking in the back of my mind for some months.
So in other words, the enterprise that was built on the back of controlling migration and building up the NHS might end up with its principal consequence being people feeling, a shortage of labour in their hospitals, in their GP surgeries.
I think it's definitely a shortage of labour, but also there's something about the different, we think about food standards, don't we? You can sort of imagine, the checks and balances on the food is one thing, but then obviously there's lots and lots of different types of training available, and you can be qualified in different types of ways. And I think a much, much more variable workforce in nursing, because you're desperate and because you're having to bring people, the reliance on more flexible sort of coming and going nursing stuff, I think will go up. And to me, that's the thing. If you're a matron, you have a much less reliable, if you like, workforce, a much less predictable workforce.
Yes, and therefore, as you say, there's a much less reliable service. Can we turn now to our co-founder, James Harding, who I know wants to come in on the discussion. James.
Matt, it was just, I tell you what it was. It was just, I really appreciate what Liz just said, just about being honest about how afraid we are about some things that happen. Food impacts on nursing, education, and also how upset people are. I think there's an emotional thing here, which is just how upset people are. The idea of a world that comes together, tries to resolve its problems together, then pulling apart. The idea that things that we got to do when we were teenagers and 20s in terms of travel and job opportunities, they're not available. But I wanted to pick up on something that you wrote, Matt, I think it was in your Monday piece the week before last, about the kind of confusion facing Rishi Sunak, right? And I think there's something really deep going on inside the Conservative Party in terms of them trying to figure out what they're about, right? And there is, if you like, on the one hand, the return to the TBGBs, the split between number 10 and number 11, where you've got a prime minister who's like, hey, let's spend on defense, and hey, let's spend on, backing the new industries of the future that, Chris mentioned, electrification of cars, etc. And then there's Rishi Sunak, who is a much more conservative. He's much more Thatcherite in his sort of instincts. And he's a new chancellor who wants to win over the Treasury and show that he's not going to rip up the spending book and he's going to be prudent. So you've got 10 versus 11 on that front. And you've also got, I think, within the Conservative Party, a kind of Thatcher versus Heseltine rift too, right? Which is Thatcher, and these are caricatures, people will point out Thatcher intervened in the economy on plenty of occasions, but Thatcher as in let enterprise rip, let animal spirits, fire up the economy, versus those people who are saying we're going to need to create clusters, we're going to need to create global champions in certain industries, we're going to need to level up, and that means we're going to need to invest. And the reason I just make this slightly kind of long-winded point is that there is an argument for the no deal Remainer. The person who emotionally believes passionately in being part of the European Union, but says, look, if you are going to do this, we understand that the way in which you're going to want to do this best is to be able to have divergence on regulation so you can begin to foster super competitive businesses or super competitive sectors. You are going to be able to, if not pick winners, at least pick sectors and have government interventions. And the reason why I think this feels like such a mess is that the European critique of the UK in this negotiation is that the European Union, and Barnier says, Britain has never told them what they want, right? And I've got some real sympathy with that, because even today, as the Prime Minister goes to Brussels, I still don't know what he wants. I don't really know whether he wants to say, look, we want to rip up these relationships with the European Union. It's not just, as Giles says, about sovereignty. It's about the ability to make independent economic policy in ways that are radically divergent, so we are significantly more competitive. And if that were the argument, you may say it's the wrong argument, but at least it would be clarity about what the argument is. And that's what I think the problem is. I personally still don't know exactly what they're after.
It's very interesting because, to your point, James, about the no deal Remainer, one of Gove's big points when he was at DEFRA was that actually getting out of the EU would enable the UK to have a much more animal-friendly structure of tighter regulation, which he characterized, and I suspect he might be right, as a vote winner, something that would be possible. So it's interesting that divergence doesn't always necessarily involve a bonfire of the regulations. In fact, it might mean something quite different. And as you say, state aid has always been a big part of this debate, pre and post Cummings. So again, one enters 2021 with a sense not really knowing where Boris wants to go, and not entirely clear whether he knows either.
Yeah. I agree. And you do sense there's this thing, which is the way the conversation's been held is odd. You could understand almost if he said, look, we're getting divorced. It's not just we're moving out of the marital bed. We don't want to move out of the marital bed into twin beds. We're going to go through the painful and difficult business of getting divorced, and then we're going to set up a new home of our own. There's a narrative there you could carry people with. Not a lot of big businesses that are invested in, in Brussels and the rules that they set. I just point out one final thing, which is we did the Behind the News podcast the week before last with Ivan Rogers. Yeah. Ivan Rogers, as you'll remember, was the EU's representative in Brussels. His point was we've just underestimated that the EU is not a superpower in defense. It's not a superpower, in AI or tech. It is a regulatory superpower. And that's the thing that I think the UK has underestimated.
Absolutely. Thank you, James. Can we move to Louise Jarvis, if you're there, Louise, who I think had some interesting points to make about potential food scares and so on. Louise, hi, welcome.
Oh, yes. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, well, I was just making the point that actually a lot of this Brexit has all been about the narrative, and on a large extent facts have gone out the window. So just pondering as what Liz was sharing, there will be issues potentially with food, and that is a genuine fear of some people and jobs and everything like that. But I just think the narrative they will be able to steer away from. It's not just about Brexit. That's because they've got the pandemic, which is a nice, easy that's one of the problems. But there's, job losses are impacted by a number of different things. Brexit might be a main thing, but there'll be lots of other things that are impacting that as well. So I'm not sure when you're asking the question, what will make people regret Brexit, that it will be things like that, because the narrative will, I suspect, be fairly strong against that. It will be things like, their freedom to go on holiday easily, or stuff like that, or maybe seeing the outworkings of Northern Ireland, whatever happens over there, which can't really be blamed very easily on anything else other than Brexit. That might be that will help lead, if those things come to pass, that will be where people start to regret it. Sorry.
Well, no, it's a very interesting point, because it depends upon what you anticipate, or rather the direction of travel you anticipate public opinion heading in 2021. And it sounds from what you're saying that you think in a vaccinated world where people are able to head back abroad on holiday, they might see any economic aftershocks as simply, the final impact of COVID rather than Brexit related.
I think just sometimes the economic impact on when you're narrowing it down to individual people's lives, there is so many other factors. It is not just one factor usually that impacts you economically. And if you believe Brexit is the big impact, then you believe Brexit's the big impact. If you don't believe Brexit's the big impact, then you don't believe that. And I'm not sure. Have to be really, really major catastrophe specifically that can be very easily attached to Brexit for people to see the economic impacts and really blame Brexit for that. I think particularly initially, as you say, post pandemic, when we can travel, that will be where it's impacting your life. Is like, oh, I want to go on holiday to Spain, but it was a bit of a faff because I had to do X, Y, and Z. And then when I got back, I had to join this queue rather than this, it'll be things like that you can't actually blame on anything else other than Brexit.
Yes,
possibly.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And could we go to Louise Simpson now, who I think was putting something out in the chat. And hi, Louise, how are you?
Hi.
Hi, you said something very interesting in the chat, which I'd like to explore, which was that maybe a positive byproduct of Brexit might be an increase in localism, which is certainly something we've been very interested in, Tortoise. But I'd love to hear more of why you think that's so.
Well, I just sort of think it's obvious, but it is a huge opportunity to buy local, to create local, to with the internet, you really can create interconnected local businesses, small businesses. It's a huge opportunity, and yeah, but you know, I'm the most rampant Remainer there is, but I do see that there is a side where there really is an advantage to not be, just being back to being human scale, smaller communities, dealing locally, interacting locally.
Just to push you on that, Louise, do you mean because people will be forced by the impact on international food supply chains to do so, or because they'll be driven by a sense of a greater sense of cultural locality and belonging to an area? Both.
And I think you know, I think it's, you know, I mean, I'm a globalist. I simply can't bear the whole idea of this. And you could have this localism with globalism, but I think it's people are gonna. There could be an incredible burst of energy, you know, from these rampant Remainers to prove that they were right. I don't think so, and I certainly don't think so under the current leadership, and I don't think there are any others. But actually, if you had somebody really good leading, it could be phenomenal. But I really am speaking as a rampant Remainer. But I can't help seeing that there is a huge opportunity here.
Yeah, it's a very interesting perspective, and obviously, you know, as you say, that there's no intrinsic tension between globalism and localism. Indeed, I think a lot of books have been written under the title globalism. The question always is what does it mean in practice? But it's certainly something, you know, to monitor. I wondered if we could go to Thomas Jackson, who was raising some interesting questions about the sort of four-dimensional chess of devolution. Thomas, I don't want to paraphrase what you were saying, so maybe you could elaborate for us.
Well, really, it was sort of looking at, obviously we don't know what's going to happen with Scotland, but seeing that Boris Johnson seems to be pushing away the SNP rather than bringing them closer. I was really wondering sort of how, if Scotland does sort of increase devolution and step further away from a centralised government, if that might make the whole issue of Northern Ireland being further away from the UK less of a thing. I mean, obviously there's been this whole thing that the UK has been very much, and centralised UK government has been very much in their sort of mediating situations. But if Scotland goes well with being without Westminster, I think then Northern Ireland might not need it as much either.
And so against counterintuitively, you think there is a chance that Brexit might strengthen the union rather than loosen it?
I think it's both ways. I think it really hangs on Scottish elections. That if the Scottish elections go massively in the SNP's favour, and there is increasing demand for the SNP and Scotland's gain independence, then there'll sort of be this wave of devolution that sweeps across the country, and that will fire Northern Ireland out. But then again, I think, as you say, Brexit could strengthen it if Scotland has a bit of a panic after the EU and needs to stay closer if they're not going to have a viable option after.
Thanks very much, Thomas. I'd like to turn to Andrew Girdwood, who's a great stalwart of our thinkings and a friend of Tortoise. Andrew, what's your take on the impact of Brexit on devolution, and also how quickly do you think that narrative would unfold?
I think pretty quickly. So I mean, I don't quite understand it. From my point of view, it's contradictory to say I will only accept my rulers to be within 75 miles of me. People who are not local cannot rule me, which is the anti-Westminster argument, and yet be pro-European. However, that does seem to describe most of Scotland right now. I think you were talking before about how the Brexiteers might be able to spin any bad thing that happens because of Brexit as a not a Brexit thing. I think the reverse will happen here in Scotland, where all the bad things, no matter what it is, will get blamed on Westminster, the Conservatives, and Brexit. As it is already, whenever anything happens, my Facebook feed is flooded with people saying, "Oh, are we better together?" You know, PPE, cronyism. Are we still better together? I don't see the connection, but nevertheless, that's the meme tsunami that crashes weekly upon us. So I think it'll move quite quickly.
And do you think that there's a difference between deal and no deal in that debate, or is in fact is the difference marginal in terms of its impact upon the devolution stroke independence argument?
I think it's marginal. I don't think it matters.
Do you think? I mean, it's interesting. I noticed Liz in the chat saying, and I echo, you know, do feed us stories of consequences we see to Brexit. That one of the problems with the whole Brexit debate has been it has slightly been two bald men arguing over a comb, or to mix metaphors whilst not noticing that their house is on fire. In that we concentrate on, you know, fantastically complicated diplomatic details, and sometimes rightly so, without actually looking at the impact on daily life. And I just wonder, you know, from a Scottish perspective, whether a lot of this very sort of detailed argument has been the narcissism of small differences, in the sense that what's really going to happen on January the 1st is that a lot of Scottish people are going to feel the end of any allegiance to the United Kingdom, such as they had.
Yes, I think so. And I'm conflicted on this, because I think the world would be better with fewer borders, not more borders. But I cannot look towards Westminster and go, "Oh, thank goodness I'm part of that. I'm glad they're looking after me." I mean, if you could look at Westminster and think that right now. So if you're offered an alternative, any alternative, I totally understand why people are grasping for it. And of course, in the future, there is the line that Scotland could rejoin Europe. And wouldn't that be a transformation for people? So I just can't see it getting any better. I can't see the argument for devolution reducing. I can only see it going, or not just devolution, independence, I can only see it going up. There's nowhere else for it to go.
No, absolutely. Although, of course, as you would be the first to say, the mechanics of that are quite complicated.
Yeah.
Can we turn to Anthony Cope, who raises the interesting question of federalism? Anthony.
Oh, hi. I wasn't expecting this. Anyway.
Welcome.
Yeah, hi. Devolution is really sort of a journey, isn't it? And the real problem with devolution is, like, nobody really knows what the destination is. It's just like Brexit. Nobody really knows what the destination is. But with devolution, it should be federalism, because everybody wants to sort of run their own little bit. So why can't they do that but still keep?
Eileen, I think you've gone muted.
Somebody muted me.
Far away. We can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry. So devolution as a destination, which should be federalism, but then that makes sure that we keep the structure of the UK together, but we can still carry on moving forward with trade deals, etc. And if one day we want to rejoin the EU, we can do it as one block rather than.
And by federalism, I take it you mean within the, so, you know, Metro Mayors plus.
Well, yes. I mean, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland are small enough to sort of do their own thing, so they can go, like, you know, proper federal. But England is too big, so that needs to be broken down even further. So like Liverpool Mayor, Greater Manchester Mayor, North East Mayor, although Mr. Cummings stopped that, didn't he? So we should be doing that, because basically people in different parts of England even want different things. So like Cornwall has always thought of itself as a bit different. So let them have their devolution and they can sort of do their own thing. But England can once again stay together. It would actually get rid of the North-South divide as well, because then that tension wouldn't be there so much, because everybody would be a lot happier, I think. You know what I mean?
Yes, interesting. It's federalism as as a constitutional version of levelling up. No thinking that main lines on Brexit is complete without Chris Cook talking about fish or Northern Ireland. So I'd like to go back to Chris. And first of all, I know you have strong views on fish, Chris. So can you give us a kind of definitive, if pithy, answer to where fish stand? And then, given that we've seen that the internal market bill has been watered down to exclude some of the more potentially inflammatory clauses on affecting the Northern Ireland Protocol, where do you think the Northern Ireland issue now stands?
So, fish. The first thing on fish is obviously it's very small. If you go to, if like me, you're a fan of Crystal Palace Football Club, that is. If you look to the right hand from where I sit, the right hand end of the stadium, the people sitting in the big stand, that's roughly the size of the British fishing industry. It's a bit bigger actually, and it will have higher incomes, right? It is fishing is less strategically important than the Holmesdale Road end at Crystal Palace, right? That's to sort of put it in context. The train line to Hull will probably makes more money than fishing. The problem though is that the distribution of that cash, and to Andrew's sort of points actually, that one of the things that we will get if we get a deal that gives us a decent haul of fishing is something we can sell to Northeast Scotland. So Northeast Scotland has a group of very, very strange voters in it who were Nats to begin with, right? The original Tartan Tory Nats were up there. Then they voted yes in 2014, and then they've switched the Tories since, and they're leavers, right? They're sort of pro-fishing sovereigntyists is part of their DNA. And actually their emotional hold on Scottish voters is quite important. And if Boris Johnson comes back with something that says this is going to really work for like Peterhead, this is really going to work for the Northeast fishermen in Scotland, it will be a thing that really matters in a forthcoming referendum fight, especially if, as Andrew's sort of pointing to, we get to a situation where people are talking about rejoining the EU and giving back that fish. So there will end up being it'll be a wedge issue that'll be very useful to drive between, like the Edinburgh solicitors of the SNP and the traditional Tartan Tories. It will be it's quite weird that these people have gone from voting for Scottish nationalists to British nationalists, I have to say. I find the journey interesting, but they are there and they matter. On Northern Ireland, actually, the government has, while we've been here, has dropped the offending clauses of the internal market bill. So the incredibly transparent negotiating ploy that they would offer has been cashed in. That chip has gone. The idea that if you're planning to break an international treaty, you generally don't give notice a year in advance that you're going to do it through legislation, which you probably can't pass, right? Like the transparency of the ploy has been underappreciated in the British press. You took it all very seriously. But yeah, they would just do it if they were going to do it. They would just not apply the rules. So that chip has been cashed in, and they have in the last hour dropped the internal market stuff, which is very good news because it means that we're actually going to apply the withdrawal agreement provisions on Ireland.
Although, where does that remind us where that leaves the different borders that affect Northern Ireland? Because now we've all got rather confused.
So the key intellectual point about it, this might be the easiest way to think of it, is that the purpose of the regulations are we can't have checks between Armagh and Cavan, right? So we can't have checks on the land border within Ireland.
Yeah.
So if things are going to enter from the UK into Northern Ireland and then go into the Republic, the EU needs to be able to defend that border. So we're putting in place the minimum possible set of checks to stop goods that aren't allowed to be sold in the EU, either because the tariffs haven't been paid or they don't meet regulatory standards, from leaking through. And so there is going to be a border which will be tougher on some things than others between Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, and the severity of the border will depend on how likely it is that a good will leak through from Northern Ireland into the Republic, or how risky it is for the EU to happen, right? The EU doesn't care about, bits and bobs here and there. It does care about, Indian prawns that it's banned from the market because they cause blindness. And it does care about if Britain starts dropping its environmental standards, it wants to have a process in place to stop that stuff getting into the EU market through the back door. So it's a risk-based sort of, it's rather than going through line by line on what kinds of things are, that's the sort of framework. That's the idea of what they're doing. So to
what extent is that an east-west border then, Chris?
Oh, it's a very significant east-west border. Like I mentioned earlier that garden centres in England can't sell, or like stopping selling into Northern Ireland because they'll have to come up with a load of paperwork to show that they meet the phytosanitary provisions for the EU, which we'll now need to do. It'll be quite significant for things like manufacturing. There is a flip side, by the way, which is that that Northern Irish goods will be able to take advantage of various EU stuff and various UK stuff. So it's been pointed out that actually the goods made in Northern Ireland should be able to benefit from EU trade deals, even if the UK doesn't. It hasn't signed up to an equivalent deal. While at the same time, it can also, if the company is big enough and it's kind of worth their while to make the regulation work, it can also get the benefit of UK trade deals because it's in this weird dual zone. So it could be good for big manufacturers in Northern Ireland, like Bombardier and people are up there.
Very interesting. We're coming to the end of the hour, and I wanted to go on to America, but I think today is really a one subject day, which is peculiar because actually it's a two subject day, and it's perhaps the first day for a long time that COVID has provided a good news story with the first vaccine being administered, whereas Brexit has come back into the public eye as a serious matter of risk. And as James said, it's a moment full of emotion and fear, and those have both been dominant in the Brexit narrative as it has ebbed and flowed over the last 4.5 years. It's difficult to sum up. I'll do my best. I mean, I think Giles is absolutely right that if one reads the runes, Boris is clearly doing his level best to get a deal, and certainly as Chris said, the removal of those rather flashy clauses from the internal market bill suggests that that is the way things are heading, if there is indeed a direction of travel. I think it's still really interesting, and I think we have more work to do to try and, as it were, pull some of the helium out of the balloon and descend to earth and try and understand what all this is going to mean in practice for citizens. Chris talked about a sort of shopping list of issues from animal exports to border checks to checking on goods, animals, data protection, data handling, etc., etc. And I think these will in turn all translate into hugely important granular grievances, or potentially, if the Brexiteers are correct, upsides. Remains to be seen. I was struck by the way that Chris framed the Remainer household being pleasantly surprised by a sector to be decided, TBD, doing better than expected because we're free of the manacles of Brussels, or the Brexiteer household being shocked to discover that the NHS is in difficulties and is not as robust as it was before. And Liz too talked about that with particular respect to the NHS, but also I think with harking back to some of the documents that were leaked at the beginning of this week about worst case scenarios, food prices and so These are things which have not yet really been discussed in public discourse or political narrative, and I think that they need to be as the clock runs out to January the 1st, because they will become ever more a part of the concerns we have. It's interesting that Brexit continues to be the empty canvas onto which people project almost anything, and we see, plausible cases being made for the Brexit as a strengthener of the union, as a solvent of the union, greater federalism, greater localism. All these things are on people's minds, and I think that is both a source of potential policy creativity, but also of danger of expectation, that so much is loaded and so much is freighted into this single moment, and no idea it kind of conveys that more than James's idea of the no-deal Remainer, which is like all paradoxes, actually, to use the strict definition of paradox, makes total sense, which is that there is a case for being out, but using that out properly, but using that outness to pursue a destiny that Remainers in other circumstances would have found very much to their taste. And that seems to me to both capture the level of remaining confusion, ambiguity, and also the work we have to do at Tortoise to try and really get a grip of the detail of what this will mean, away from the chancelleries of Brussels and London and the inner workings of the Conservative Party, but for our members and for citizens in general. It's gone past 2. I've overrun. Thank you very much, as ever, to everyone who's attended. Have a very good day, and we will see you next week, if not before. Thanks.